As we all age, housing is going to become a concern. And we have to make choices where to live. Do we live at home or with a family member?
Well, it's a big decision for sure, because the other option is to move into an assisted living facility. And the thought of that for me really is frightening. That's not what I want to do.
It's frightening?
Frightening.
Wow.
And it might be frightening for you as well, but it also could be the best option. So we don't know, but that's what we're talking about today.
So today we're going to talk more about the differences between the two, aging in place and aging in an assisted living space. And we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of each.
You know, my mom unfortunately got dementia, and we tried living, having her continue to live at home. And it worked out okay for a while. We actually brought in caregivers and all of that. And it probably because my mom was a smoker, so she was doing like 2 packs a day. It was really hard for us to imagine putting her into a facility because you can't smoke in there.
Well, but the smoking piece, she would light a cigarette, put it down, walk into another room, light a cigarette, put it down, and before you knew it, she had cigarettes burning in 4 or 5 rooms, which was dangerous.
Yeah, that was part of the problem. But the other thing was, even, my dad unfortunately was an alcoholic, so his attention span, or his ability to really pay attention to my mom and what she was doing, didn't work out that well. So we had nursing come in and housekeeping. We had food delivering. My brother, my sister, and I all took turns coming over. But then one night at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the winter, my mom got out of the house, right out the front door.
In just her nightgown.
Yeah.
In New York. So not like she was in Arizona in the middle of the night.
No, and a neighbor fortunately found her at 2 o'clock in the morning sitting in front of their house in the snowbank. So the next day, my dad calls me, tells me about it, and, that was it. We had to put her into facility because it just was too dangerous.
Yeah, it was unsafe for her. It was a burden your dad couldn't handle.
Right.
And we were all still working, your brother and sister-in-law, you and I.
Yeah,
and it was not something we could pay the right amount of attention to as well.
So that was my mom's situation. But let's talk now about the advantages of aging in place, of staying in your home with a family or a friend. And I think the first advantage really is that you can maintain a great sense of independence and autonomy, right?
Sure. I mean, you have a similar control over your daily life, right? Your schedule, the food you eat, maybe, your routines, and, you really stay self-sufficient.
Which is important.
As long as you can.
Right, because that's important to feel like you can make decisions and that you can have control over your life.
Right.
The other advantage of aging in place, again, either your home or a child's home or something, is social connections, because you get to stay connected to your existing social networks.
And I think that kind of goes both ways. I know we didn't talk about this, but, sometimes aging in place can be very lonely, and your social connections are more relevant in aging with a similar group of people.
It's true.
So
that's certainly one of the disadvantages, which we'll get into in a minute.
But your social connections, your family can come visit you. There's no visiting hours, right? Your
Whenever
friends
they
can
want.
swing by. Your neighbors will still maybe check in on you.
Well, your kids can sleep over, the grandkids can sleep over, your neighbors can just swing by.
Right.
But that does all help the feeling of isolation and being lonely when you're in an institution and you're in your own room and there's a door, and when you go out the door, you're in the facility.
Yeah,
So,
right.
But I think the third advantage of aging in place is really continuing this sense of belonging, right?
Right.
You're in a familiar community,
Yeah.
and you feel like you belong.
Yeah, it's that community that you remember, and it also brings up memories and excitement and, helps you stay connected. You can, stay involved in local events and even charities and social activities or senior centers, right? I mean, all of that is at your fingertips without any constraint.
Well, I think the big thing, too, is when you think about it, when you're in your own home and it's familiar and there's pictures of the family and the chair you like to sit in and the TV you like to watch, it does feel safe and it does feel happy.
The fourth thing you could do if you're at home is you can personalize your care a little differently than perhaps in a bigger institution, right?
Yeah, so you can get the specific care you need for, whether you have an illness like my mom had, if you need memory care help, or you've got a broken hip or something like that. But, a combination of family, friends, and then care that comes in, it really helps to be able to do that in familiar surroundings.
And the fifth thing is research shows that there's, some real advantage to your emotional well-being of still being in your home. Those familiar surroundings. We talked about memories, your personal belongings, things that bring up memories and stories that you can tell, when people do come visit.
Well, again, I remember my mom at first when she was at home, she felt secure, she wasn't stressed, she didn't have that anxiety because she was living at home. But if you move out of your home into a facility, then that stress and anxiety builds up because you're living in a new environment you might not like.
Right.
You might not like the people.
The sixth thing we kind of investigated and did a little research around is it cost advantageous to live at home? And it can be less expensive than a senior facility, but it depends on what else you need.
Right, and it depends who can supplement the care. If you need 24-hour nursing care and really some specialized care for, like my mom, again, I keep going back to my mom, but other illness you have, then the cost can kind of get high. So you really need to take a look at this, whether it makes sense or not. But if you live in a home and your health is pretty good and you've got a good neighborhood and all of that, it might make sense. And if your house is fully paid for, that helps too, because that
Right.
helps reduce your cost.
This is really a great option for a lot of families, depending on your individual circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So you have to take a hard look at this as an option.
Right. Now, that sounds wonderful, but let's look at the disadvantages of aging in place at home. And the first one is safety.
Right.
My mom, she got out of the house. If your house has slippery floors or uneven surfaces or a lot of steps or poor lighting, that can be a problem. Or if the bathroom isn't really geared up for someone who's aging, then it becomes a problem.
It's funny you say that because at your age, 66, and my age, 58, we talk about about our home in Connecticut, which is multi-level.
4 floors, yeah.
And, it was built in 1780. It was built in 1780, so the stairs are steep and short. And, it's really not a place to age.
Right.
So we're already starting to talk about that.
Yeah, our house is probably unsafe. But the other thing to think about is because you're not in a facility, but you're at home, you do have to have increased caregiving responsibilities, and that might fall on family and friends, and that might not work out for your family and friends.
No, it could be a big concern for your family, your friends, your social network, your faith-based facilities if they provide any care or check-ins. It can be mentally and physically demanding on those that you love.
Yep. So you have to, again, this is a family decision, we'll talk about that at the end, but your family might have difficulty balancing their life, their job, with your caregiving.
Right.
So I mentioned about the handrails and all of that and the steps, but home maintenance and modification costs to your house could be expensive.
Yeah.
If you need ramps and grab rails and stair lifts or stair lifts, or if your home is...
Oh, that chair that goes up the side?
Yeah,
is
the
that what you
magic
mean?
chair, yeah. I remember some people had that. They call it the magic chair. When my kids were little, they'd go to visit a grandparent. But
And they'd go up.
yeah, but that can be really expensive. So you need to be aware of that too.
Right. The other thing you have to be aware of is depending on where you live, do you have limited access to healthcare facilities and services, right? If you live super remote, you might be limited to where you can go in the case of emergency.
I know, because if there is an emergency and there's no one nearby, no friends, no family, no hospital, that, you have to really understand that. And the other thing that gets complicated, if you are aging in place and you've got friends and family taking care of you, we made the decision to get a do not resuscitate, a living will.
Yep.
So who's gonna make that decision at the critical moment? When when you're in an institution, they do it. That's what they're supposed to do. It's a little bit harder for a child to do that with their parent. So it's something to consider as well.
And really the last kind of disadvantage is, you have could have limited social and recreational opportunities. Sometimes in these big assisted living or even small assisted living centers, they actually move you through your social circles, whether you want to or not.
Well,
sometimes.
They do. And I know my mom, where she was, it was a great home, and they kept her active all day long. They would take her to the hairdresser, they'd have bingo night, she ate with her friends.
Yep.
So there is a big advantage to that. Again, if you're isolated where you live, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
But here's some things to think about. What we think you should do is get a piece of paper and the categories we just talked about, write them down the left-hand side and put aging in place or going to an institution and put the two columns and put pluses and minuses by each, right?
Yeah,
To
really,
see-
just make a list with the pluses and minuses of each. Look at what healthcare needs you have right now and can they be met in your home? And is the reality of your home? Because sometimes it's like, yeah, my home is safe, but is your home safe? Or will the modifications be expensive to make it safe?
And then, again, add to the list your social network. What will that be like at home? Take a hard look at the cost differential. Do you have good insurance? Do you have long-term care insurance? What kind of care can you expect from family and friends? Am I asking too much from them?
Right.
So, this is not an easy decision, but it's a decision that must be made. You've got to choose where you're going to go or not go. So take your time looking at the questions we just gave you.
Yeah, and as you start to get comfortable with your decisions with yourself and your spouse or significant other, you have to talk to your family. It really should be a family decision that is insightful, thoughtful, and make sure you have plenty of time to plan.
Now, we hope that this video was helpful for you guys. And if it was, we want you to watch this next one, Retiring Solo, How to Ward Off Loneliness. So if you're thinking of staying in your home alone, this video is going to give you 7 strategies to keep you from becoming lonely.